Well said. Howard.
Hey Gary, Marshall Scott, everyone. Hope everyone's had a good week. Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add to what Marshall just outlined is I believe there was a report in the last 24 hours about concerns about Russia and China with bots out there adding to the noise in social media. So I think, unfortunately, the answer is yes. I think it's just a reflection of society as a whole. And the fact that we've got this world of AI, we've got this world of where anyone could just put anything out there, it really is an attack on the truth and what are really facts. And it's more and more difficult for people to either question is something factual or just by appearance, because of the emotion, they're adopting it as a fact and they're running with it. So I even looked it up before the show, Gary, when you posted what the topic is, and some people may be fully aware of it. It's not necessarily political violence, but it is violence. There's two cases on this app in particular in Clubhouse. One happened in 2023, another one happened last year that actually ended in homicide. So whether it's violence of the typical nature or political violence, social media is, in my view, definitely spawning it, and I'll land there. Thanks, Gary.
Maybe we need to, and some people actually came up with some great suggestions in the chat about how to diffuse a situation, potentially. And I don't hear that. That's the first I've heard of a suggestion. We train ourselves as a society to diffuse a situation and to recognize when somebody needs to be red flagged. And I don't say that necessarily in the legal sense, but by their fellow people that they know, their family members and whatever. Maybe sometimes it must the police or a social worker or a mental health professional. But I really love the idea of us trying to find ways to train ourselves as a society to deal with this when it occurs, but also to find ways to take preventative measures. And I think online we can all do that. We all have the ability to influence a discussion online. And I also think that if a discussion gets too heated, it's not necessary to get the last word. Nobody's going to lose sleep
Okay, this is candidate John onboarding. This is for petition signatures and run. you, Tony. If you want to speak, you can raise your hand. Trying to onboard a petition circulator. Give it another 6 minutes and then we'll call it.
to change the individual. I mean, there's been the political revolution, the economic revolution, in the time of the Reformation, the religious revolution. All these aimed, as I say, not directly at the human being, but at his surroundings, so that by modifying the surroundings, we did achieve at one remove an effect upon the human being. Today, we are faced, I think, with the approach of what may be called the ultimate revolution, the final revolution, where a man can act directly on the mind body of his fellows. Well, needless to say, some kind of direct action on human mind bodies has been going on since the beginning of time. But this has generally been of a violent nature. The techniques of terrorism have been known from time immemorial, and people have employed them with more or less ingenuity, sometimes with the utmost crudity, sometimes with a good deal of skill acquired by a process of trial and error, finding out what the best ways of using torture, imprisonment, constraints of various kinds. But as I think it was Metternich said many years ago, you can do everything with bayonets except sit on them. That if you are going to control any population for any length of time, you must have some measure of consent. It's exceedingly difficult to see how pure terrorism can function indefinitely. It can function for a fairly long time, but I think sooner or later you have to bring in an element of persuasion, an element of getting people to consent to what is happening to them. Well, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This seems to me the ultimate in malevolent revolution, shall we say. And this is a problem which has interested me for many years, and about which I wrote 30 years ago a fable, A Brave New World, which is essentially the account of a society making use of all the devices at that time available, and some of the devices which I imagined to be possible, making use of them in order to, first of all, to standardize the population, to iron out inconvenient human differences, to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of scientific caste system. And since then I have continued to be extremely interested in this problem, and I have noticed with increasing dismay that a number of the predictions which were purely fantastic when I made them 30 years ago have come true or seem in process of coming true, that a number of techniques about which I talked seem to be here already, and that there seems to be a general movement in the direction of this kind of ultimate revolution, this method of control by which people can be made to enjoy a state of affairs by any decent standard they ought not to enjoy. I mean the enjoyment of servitude. Well, this process, as I say, has gone on for over the years, and I become more and more interested in what is happening. And here I would like briefly to compare the parable of Orwell wrote his book between 45 and 48, at the time when the Stalinist terror regime was still in full swing, and just after the collapse of the Hitlerian terror regime. And his book, which I admire greatly, it's a book of very great talent and extraordinary ingenuity, shows is, so to say, a projection into the future of the immediate past, of what for him was the immediate past and the immediate present. It was a projection into the future of a society where control was exercised wholly by terrorism and the violent attacks upon the mind body of individuals. Whereas my own book, which was written in 1932, when there was only a mild dictatorship in the form of Mussolini in existence, was not overshadowed by the idea of terrorism. And I was therefore free in a way which Orwell was not free to think about these other methods of control, these non-violent methods. And I'm inclined to think that the scientific dictatorships of the future, and I think there are going to be scientific dictatorships in many parts of the world, will be probably a good deal nearer to the Brave New World pattern than to the 1984 pattern. They will be a good deal nearer, not because of any humanitarian qualms in the scientific dictators, but simply because the Brave New World pattern is probably a good deal more efficient than the other. That if you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, the state of servitude, the state of being, having their differences ironed out and being made amenable to mass production methods on the social level, if you can do this, then you are likely to have a much more stable, a much more lasting society, a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps. So that my own feeling is that the 1984 picture was tinged, of course, by the immediate past and the present in which Orwell was living, but that the past and present of those years does not represent, I feel, the likely trend of what is going to happen. Needless to say, we shall never get rid of terrorism. This will always find its way to the surface. But I think that insofar as dictators become more and more scientific, more and more concerned with a technically perfectly run society, they will be more and more interested in the kind of techniques which I imagined and described from existing realities in Brave New World. So that it seems to me then that this ultimate revolution is really not very far away, that we already a number of the techniques for bringing about this kind of control are here, and it remains to be seen when and where and by whom they will first be applied in any large scale. And first, let me talk about a little bit about the improvement even in the techniques of terrorism. I think there have been improvements. Pavlov, after all, made some extremely profound observations both on animals and on human beings. And he found, among other things, that conditioning techniques applied to animals or humans in a state either of psychological or physical stress sank in, so to say, very deeply into the mind body of the creature, and were extremely difficult to get rid of, that they seem to be embedded more deeply than other forms of conditioning. And this, of course, this fact, I think, was discovered empirically in the past. People use of many of these techniques. But the difference between the old empirical intuitive methods and our own methods is the difference between a sort of hit and miss craftsman's point of view and the genuinely scientific point of view. I mean, I think there is a real difference between ourselves and, say, the inquisitors of the 16th century. We know much more precisely what we are doing than they knew, and we can extend, because of our theoretical knowledge, we can extend what we are doing over a wider area with a greater assurance of producing something which really works. In this context, I would like to mention the extremely interesting chapters in Dr. William Sargent's Battle for the Mind, where he points out how intuitively some of the great religious teachers, leaders of the past, hit on the Pavlovian method. He speaks specifically of Wesley's method of producing conversions, which were essentially based upon a technique of heightening psychological stress to the limit by talking about hellfire, and so making people extremely vulnerable to suggestion, and then suddenly releasing this stress by offering hopes of heaven. And this is a very interesting chapter of showing how completely, on purely intuitive and empirical grounds, a skilled natural psychologist, as Wesley was, could discover these Pavlovian methods. Well, as I say, we now know the reason why these techniques worked, and there is no doubt at all that we can, if we want to, carry them much further than was possible in the past. And of course, in the recent history of brainwashing, both applied to prisoners of war and to the lower personnel within the Communist Party in China, we see that the Pavlovian methods have been applied systematically and evidently with extraordinary efficacy. I mean, I think there can be no doubt that by the application of these methods, a very large army of totally devoted people has been created. The conditioning has been driven in, so to say, by kind of psychological iontophoresis into the very depths of the people's being, and has got so deep that it's very difficult for it ever to be rooted out. And these methods, I think, are a real refinement on the older methods of terror, because they combine methods of terror with methods of acceptance, that the person who is subjected to a form of terroristic stress, but for the purpose of inducing a kind of voluntary, quotes, acceptance of the state and the psychological state into which he has been driven, and the state of affairs within which he finds himself. So that, as I say, there has been, I think, a definite improvement, shall we say, even in the techniques of terrorism. But then we come to the consideration of other techniques, of non-terroristic techniques for inducing consent and for inducing people to love their servitude. Here, I mean, I think we can, I don't think I can possibly go into all of them because I don't know all of them, but I mean, I can mention a few of the more obvious methods which can now be used and which are based upon the sort of statistical structure of a population in regard to its suggestibility. It's very interesting when you look at the findings in different fields. I mean, in the field of hypnosis, in the field of administering placebos, for example, in the field of general suggestion, in states of drowsiness or of light sleep, you will find the same sorts of orders of magnitude continually cropping up. You will find, for example, that the experienced hypnotists will tell one that the number of people, the percentage of people who can be hypnotized with the utmost facility, just like that, is about 20%. That about a corresponding number at the other end of the scale are very, very difficult or almost impossible to hypnotize. And that in between there lies a large mass of people who can, with more or less difficulty, be hypnotized, that can gradually be, if you work hard enough, be got into the hypnotic state. And in the same way, the same sort of figures crop up again, for example, in relation to the administration of placebos. So a big experiment was carried out 3 or 4 years ago in the General Hospital in Boston on post-operative cases where several hundred men and women suffering comparable kinds of pain after serious operations were given injections whenever they asked for them, whenever the pain got bad, and the injections 50% of the time were of morphine, 50% of the time were of distilled water, and about 20% of those who went through the experiment, about 20% of them got just as much relief from the distilled water as from the morphine. About 20% got no relief from the distilled water, and in between were those who got some relief or got relief occasionally. So here again we see the same sort of distribution. And similarly with regard to what in Brave New World I call hypnopedia, which is the sleep teaching. I was talking not long ago to a man who manufactures records which people can listen to during the light part of sleep. I mean, these are records for getting rich, for sexual satisfaction, for confidence in salesmanship, and so on. And he said it's very interesting that these records are sold on a money-back basis, and he says that there is regularly between 15 and 20% of people who write indignantly saying the records don't work at all, and he sends the money back at once. On the other hand, there are some, over 20% who write enthusiastically saying they're now much richer, their sexual life is much better, etc., etc. And these, of course, are the dream clients, and they buy more of these records. And then in between are those who complain they're not getting much results, and they have letters written to them saying, well, go persist, my dear, go on, and you'll get there. They generally do get results in the long run. Well, as I say, this... on the basis of this, I think we see quite clearly that the human populations can be categorized according to their suggestibility fairly clearly. I suspect very strongly that this 20% is the same in all these cases. And I suspect also that it would not be at all difficult to recognize in very early childhood who were those who were extremely suggestible, who were those who were extremely unsuggestible, and who were those who occupy the intermediate space. Quite clearly, if everybody were extremely unsuggestible, organized society would be quite impossible. And if everybody were extremely suggestible, then dictatorship would be absolutely inevitable. I mean, it's very fortunate we have people who are moderately suggestible in the majority, and who therefore preserve dictatorship, but do permit once given the fact that there are these 20% of highly suggestible people, it becomes quite clear that this is a matter of enormous political importance. For example, any demagogue who is able to get a hold of a large number of these 20% of suggestible people and to organize them is really in a position to overthrow any government in any country. And I mean, I think this, after all, we've had the most incredible example in recent years of what can be done by efficient methods of suggestion and persuasion in the form of Hitler. Anybody who's read, for example, Bullock's Life of Hitler comes forth from this with a sort of horrified admiration for this infernal genius who really understood human weaknesses, I think, almost better than anybody, and who exploited them with all the resources then available. I mean, he knew everything. I mean, for example, he knew intuitively this Pavlovian truth that conditioning installed in a state of stress or fatigue goes much deeper than conditioning installed at other times. This was why all his big speeches were organized at night. He speaks of this quite frankly, of course, in Mein Kampf. He says this was done solely because people are tired at night and therefore are much less capable of resisting persuasion than they would be during the day. And we see in all his techniques, he was using, he had discovered intuitively and by trial and error a great many of the weaknesses which we now know about on a sort of scientific way, I think much more clearly than he did. But the fact remains that this differential suggestibility, this susceptibility to hypnosis, I do think is something which has to be considered very carefully in relation to any kind of thought about democratic government. I mean, if there are 20% of the people who can really be suggested into believing almost anything, as evidently they can be, then we have to take extremely careful steps to prevent the rise of demagogues who will drive them on into extreme positions and then organize them into very, very dangerous armies, private armies, which may overthrow the government. Well, this, as I say, is in this field of pure persuasion. I think we do know much more than we did in the past, and obviously we now have mechanisms for multiplying the demagogue's voice and image in a quite hallucinatory way. I mean, the television and the radio, Hitler was making enormous use of the radio. He could speak to millions of people simultaneously. I mean, this alone, of course, creates an enormous gulf between the modern and the ancient demagogue. The ancient demagogue could only appeal to as many people as his voice could reach by the yelling at his utmost, but the modern demagogue can touch literally millions at a time, and of course with the multiplication of his image, he can produce a kind of hallucinatory effect, which is of enormous hypnotic and suggestive importance. But then there are various other methods which one can think of which have, thank heaven, as yet not been used, but which obviously could be used. There is, for example, the pharmacological method. This was one of the things I talked about in Brave New World. I invented a hypothetical drug called Soma, which of course could not exist as it stood there because it was simultaneously a stimulant, a narcotic, and a hallucinogen, which seems unlikely in one substance. But the point is that in several, if you applied several different substances, you is one single one of these naturally occurring ones, which modern science has discovered. Modern science, of course, has discovered better ways of extracting the active principles from these drugs, and of course has discovered numerous ways of synthesizing new substances of extreme power. But the actual discovery of these naturally occurring things was made by primitive man, goodness knows how many centuries ago. There is, for example, in the underneath the lake dwellings, the early Neolithic lake dwellings which have been dug up in Switzerland, we find poppy heads, which looks as though people were already using this most ancient and powerful and most dangerous of narcotics, even in the days before the rise of agriculture. So that man was apparently a dope addict before he was a farmer, which is a very, very curious comment on human nature. But the difference, as I say, between the ancient mind changers, the traditional mind changers, and these new substances is that they were extremely harmful, and the new ones are not. I mean, even the permissible mind changer, alcohol, is not entirely harmless, as people may have noticed. And the other ones, the non-permissible ones, such as opium and cocaine, opium and all its derivatives, are very harmful indeed. They rapidly produce addiction and in some cases lead at an extraordinary rate to physical degeneration and death. Whereas these new substances, this is really very extraordinary. That a number of these new mind-changing substances can produce enormous revolutions within the mental side of our being, and yet do almost nothing to the physiological side. I mean, you can have an enormous revolution with LSD-25 or with the newly synthesized drug psilocybin, which is the active principle of the Mexican sacred mushroom. You can have this enormous mental revolution with no more physiological revolution than you would get from drinking 2 cocktails. And this is really a most extraordinary. And it is, of course, true that pharmacologists are producing a great many wonder drugs, which where the cure is almost worse than the disease. Every new edition of medical textbooks contains a longer and longer chapter on what are called iatrogenic diseases, that is, the diseases caused by doctors. And this is quite true, that many of the wonder drugs are extremely dangerous. I mean, they can produce extraordinary effects, and in critical conditions they should certainly be used, but they should be used with the utmost caution. But there is evidently a whole class of drugs affecting the central nervous system, which can produce enormous changes in sedation, in euphoria, in energizing the whole mental process, without doing any perceptible harm to the body. And in this sense, this represents, it seems to me, the most extraordinary revolution, that it in the hands of a dictator, these substances of one kind or another could be used in the most with complete, first of all, with complete harmlessness, and the result would be that, I mean, you can imagine a euphoric which would make people thoroughly happy, even in the most abominable circumstances. I mean, these things are possible. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing. I mean, after all, this has even been true with the crude oil drugs. I mean, as Houseman years ago remarked apropos of Milton's Paradise Lost, he says, and beer does more than Milton can to justify God's ways to man. And was an extremely crude drug compared with these ones. And you can certainly say that some of the psychic energizers and the new hallucinants can do incomparably more than Milton and all the theologians combined could possibly do to make the terrifying mystery of our existence seem more tolerable than it does. So that here I think one has an enormous area in which the ultimate revolution could function very well indeed. An area in which a great deal of control could be used by, not through terror, but through making life seem much more enjoyable than it normally does. Enjoyable to the point where, as I have said before, human beings come to love a state of things which by any reasonable, decent human standard they ought not to love. And this, I think, is perfectly possible. But then, very briefly, let me speak about one of the more recent developments in the sphere of neurology, the implantation of electrodes in the brain. This, of course, has been done on a large scale in animals, and in a few cases it's been done in cases of the hopelessly insane. And it is anybody who's watched the behavior of rats with electrodes planted in different centers must come away from this experience with the most extraordinary doubts about what on earth is in store for us if ever this is got hold of by a dictator. If I saw not long ago some rats in Magoon's laboratory at UCLA. There were two sets of them, one with electrodes planted in a pleasure center, and these rats were the technique was that they had a bar which they pressed, which turned on a very small current for a short space of time, which we had a wire connected with their electrode, and which stimulated this pleasure center, which was evidently absolutely ecstatic, because these rats were pressing the bar 18,000 times a day. Apparently, if you kept them from pressing the bar for a day, they would press the bar 36,000 times on the following day, and would fall till they fell down in complete exhaustion. And they would neither eat nor be interested in the opposite sex, and would just go on pressing this bar. Then the most extraordinary rats were those where the electrode was planted halfway between a pleasure and a pain center, and where evidently the result was a kind of mixture of the most wonderful ecstasy and being on the rack at the same time. And you would see the rats all looking at its bar and sort of saying to be or not to be, that is the question. Finally, would approach to do it in there. With this awful, if I can humanize or anthropomorphize, I mean, he was feeling something terribly mixed, and he would wait for quite a long time before pressing the bar again, but he would always press it again. This was the extraordinary thing. I noticed in this most recent issue of Scientific American, there's a very interesting article on electrodes in the brains of chickens, where the technique is very ingenious. You sink into their brains a little socket with a screw on it, and the electrode then can be screwed deeper and deeper into the brain stem, and you can test at any moment according to the depth of it goes in fractions of a millimeter of what you're stimulating, and these creatures are not merely stimulated by wire. They're fitted with a miniaturized radio receiver weighing less than an ounce, which is attached to them, so that they can be communicated with at a distance. I mean, they can run about in the barnyard, and you can press the button. And this particular area of the brain to which the electrode's been screwed down to will be stimulated, and you will get these fantastic phenomena that a sleepy chicken will suddenly get up and rush about, or an active chicken will suddenly sit down and go to sleep. they start sitting as though it were hatching out an egg, or a rooster will start fighting, or suddenly go into a state of extreme depression. The whole picture of the absolute control of the drives is terrifying. And in the few cases in which this has been done with very sick human beings, the effects are evidently very remarkable too. I was talking last summer in England to Grey Walter, who is the most eminent exponent of the electroencephalogram techniques in England, and he was telling me he's seen hopeless inmates of asylums with these things in their heads, and that these people were suffering from the uncontrollable depression, and they'd had the electrodes inserted into something resembling evidently the pleasure center of the rat. Anyhow, when they felt too bad, they just pressed a button, the battery in their pocket, and he said the result was fantastic. The mouth would go down, would suddenly turn up, and they would evidently feel, I don't know for how long at a time, very cheerful and happy. So that here again one sees the most extraordinary, revolutionary techniques which are now available to us. Now, I think what is obviously perfectly clear is that for the present these techniques are not being much used except in a purely experimental way. But I think it is extraordinarily important for us to realize, first of all, to realize what is happening, to make ourselves acquainted with what has already happened, and then to use a certain amount of imagination to extrapolate into the future the sort of things that might happen. I mean, what might happen if these fantastically powerful techniques were used by unscrupulous people in authority? What on earth would happen? What sort of society would we get? And I think this is peculiarly important because as one sees looking back over history, we have allowed in the past all those advances in technology which have profoundly changed social and individual life. We've allowed them to take us by surprise. I mean, it seems to me that during the late 18th century, early 19th century, when the new machines were making possible the factory system, it was not beyond the wit of man to see to look at what was happening and to project into the future, and maybe to forestall the really dreadful consequences which plagued England and most of Western Europe and most of this country for about 50 or 60 years, the horrible abuses of the factory system. I mean, if a certain amount of forethought had been devoted to the problem at that time, if people had first of all found out what was happening, and then used their imagination to see what might happen, and then had gone on to work out means by which the worst applications of the new techniques should not take place, then I think Western humanity might have been spared about 3 generations of utter misery which was imposed upon the poor at that time. And similarly with various technological advances now, I mean, it's quite clear we have to start thinking very, very hard about the problems of automation. And again, I think we have to think still more profoundly about the problems that may arise in relation to
to
literally get, it's like, the whole term Southern hospitality comes from this idea that what you say may or may not have consequences, right? Freedom of speech be damned. Gary, if I walk down Lexington Avenue and I insult, and I said this on, in a group chat, I insult 100 people, and the 99th person decides to either take a swing, take a stab, or do something. It's not about whether it's right or wrong anymore, right? You can't send right or wrong flowers.
Well, nobody's going to put you out on the internet.
But that's the point I'm getting to, right? So we used to live in what I believe, in a society where you thought about what you said in certain situations because there could be consequences. That's just the truth of it. It's not about right or wrong, because right or wrong is always relative. But now it's like I can say anything to anyone I want on the internet, and consequences be damned. There's really no thought of what might happen if I say or do this. And I'm sure someone is going to say, oh, well, we have freedom of speech, we have this, we have that. Listen, human beings are going to human beings. You can pass every law that you want about freedom of this, freedom of that, but in a given situation, if I say something or incite something to a person who may be like mentally incapacitated or doesn't have like mental acumen or whatever you want to call it, there could be consequences. And I think the internet has taken away, I'm just going to say it, the fear of getting punched in the mouth or getting punched in the face, because people aren't getting punched in the face for the things that they say anymore. And that's the New Yorker in me. It might be rude, it might be whatever, but I grew up in an environment where you thought about what you said because there could be consequences. And now anyone can say whatever they want to say, and without fear of quote unquote jeopardy. And the last thing I'm going to say is not going to be very popular, right? But when I heard about this guy, I started getting, like, I'm telling you, every third video was about Charlie Kirk. So now the algorithm is literally feeding me because they want me to watch the
He is
pre-roll
much
ad.
bigger in death than he ever was in life, I think is your point.
Yeah. And they want me to watch the pre-roll ads, and now there's an ad in the middle of the video. I'm just being marketed to. But what I will say is, what bothers me since in the past 2 days is now it's like, well, let's forget everything he said in life, right? Let's just forget these things.
Well,
right?
here's the thing about that. It's a very, very narrow tightrope that you're walking on that issue, because the man was assassinated. He's got these three beautiful young children and a wife. It resonates with all of us, whether we agreed with him or not. And we want to be careful, of course, to not even allege.
I don't want to victim shame or anything.
No, right. Not right. Right. We don't want to allege that he's a victim of his own making, and if he hadn't exercised his First Amendment rights, he'd still be alive, and especially because some people viewed some of the things that he said as hateful. So, we don't want to imply that he got what he deserved.
No,
so but also, I don't believe that when a person dies, whether it's violently or otherwise, that we should ignore them, ignore certain parts of who they were when they were alive. There are people who, like when President Carter died, there were all these laudatory things said about President Carter, and rightly so, especially in my opinion, the things that he did after he was president, his building homes for poor people and all that, and that was him. I mean, he actually went out there on his own. He actually rolled up his sleeves and, as a former president, and helped build some of those Habitat for Humanity homes. He deserved a lot of credit for that. There were some things that he did, some things that he said, some of the policies when he was president that were not so commendable. Well, of course, at the time the person dies, even non-violently, after a really long life from natural causes as he did, we feel that it's not proper, it doesn't feel right to analyze their life too much. And I think, he hasn't even been put in the ground yet. So I think that I personally fall on the side of, yes, I'm aware of some of the things that he said and did and espoused that I found distasteful. But I don't think this is a proper time to air them. Give it a chance to breathe.
Yeah, no,
because
I guess what I was going to say though is that it's not like what I was going to say is that the same proponents for free speech are now telling people that they can't say anything.
Well, the State Department actually issued an advisory to all foreigners, and it's not just people who are in the country illegally. They issued them an advisory, and it's the State Department, mind you. So you know what's implied here. Do not say anything negative about Charlie Kirk. Well, that's downright un-American. It violates the First Amendment and the Constitution. Applies to everybody in the country, not just to American citizens in the country.
Well, no, because it's rules for thee and not for me, right? And that's the part that really concerns me.
Right.
And
but I think personally, I don't feel comfortable exploring with any great depth the character of Charlie. Listen, we never talked about him before on this forum.
I didn't know who he was.
Right.
I never heard of this guy.
Right. So, I don't really much care what his positions were when he was alive. If I was aware of it at the time that he was alive, I probably, some of the things that he espoused, I would have raised issues with. But I never followed him. I knew who he was, of course, but I never followed him closely enough to take a microscopic look at the positions he took. So I happen to fall in the category of let's just, let the air breathe a little bit. And, in a week or two, if you want to talk about Charlie Kirk and what he stood for and the people who now feel that they have to pick up the gauntlet and whether that's good for America or whether it's problematic, I think that's a fair thing to do. But I think at this moment, I personally am not comfortable with that kind of discourse. But you are right. If people do feel comfortable, they have the right to say it, and they shouldn't be shut down. You're correct.
That was my only point. So have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you, Daryl. Jaya, I'm going to apologize to you now. We're not going to get to you. You got on the stage too late. The rule is anybody who comes on stage after. No worries. We'll get to you next time. Get in here before 5 minutes to 6 Eastern time. What's that?
I wanted to say kiddish for Charlie prayers.
All right, well, you can say kiddish for him all you want, but not here, unfortunately. Daryl, we just talked to Chris and Anson. Anson will get the last word. Chris?
Oh, Gary, I was in a great spirit before you said that last part and cut Daryl off. And I get it. This is your space and not Charlie Kirk's space.
I don't think I cut him off.
I don't think I cut him off. Let me finish what I'm going to say so you can understand what I'm saying.
I think we had a dialogue. I don't think I actually cut him off.
I would like to finish what I'm saying so you can understand what I'm saying. Because what you just stated was we should give Charlie Kirk the respect to not speak about his actual words that were not positive. And the sad part is he did not offer that same respect to anybody as long as it could help his bottom line. So I hear what you're saying because this is your space. But Charlie Kirk probably does not deserve that much respect, even out of yourself, because Charlie Kirk didn't care about who died and how they died. He was going to make it into something that he could profit off of, i.e., George Floyd telling the world that George Floyd died.
You can have that belief.
Okay.
And I can
just
agree.
want to put that out there.
And I can agree with that belief, but that's really not the topic of the room.
And I'm gonna get to it. and I'm gonna get to the topic. So I wanted to speak that for Daryl because I don't know if Daryl even seen that as something that actually happened in real time. We censored her. We censored Daryl for the sake of a person who would not censor himself for a person's emotional feelings, even before the body got cold. So let me get to the topic. So the topic is social media spawning political violence? No, Scott said it best. I'm mad Scott left because I was going to give him his praise, but Scott said it best. Political violence has been going on for centuries. This is not spewing it. If anything, this is allowing more people to catch hold of misinformation and rhetoric that can push into violence faster. I mean, we always had newspapers. There was always people that came into town and did speeches of such sort, similar to what he's done in generations prior. That what he was doing wasn't anything brand new. The brand new part is him being able to jump on a camera, put it on internet, and allow internet to just funnel whatever he decided to say through to the masses. Now, whatever, I think somebody spoke about it, whatever financial backing he had that was helping him push the agenda, well, that's another conversation. But he had the freedom to get on those stages and say what he damn well pleased. Facts or no facts. Misinformation or non-misinformation. He would go up there and speak his agenda. So I don't think that it's the internet or the social media that is doing the propagating of violence. Now, what I will say is I think and somebody else said this prior to me, that the violence is being amplified for the sake of money. Yeah, social media is a business. Regardless of how we use it, it is a company. It is somebody looking for a bottom line and a profit. So sure, if fight video on YouTube or the ones that are moving the ticker, more fight videos for you on your algorithm if you watch one fight video. Same goes for the Charlie Kirk video, as Daryl just stated, adding to the algorithms that they were watching. So it makes sense for me that social media needs to be paid attention to as a company and not as, oh, my friend in my pocket I can talk to whenever I feel like it or get reassurance whenever I need it. We need to start paying attention that those things aren't for our best interest, even if they are within your interest. They're feeding you so they can purchase dinner for their family. They're feeding you so they can make sure they have pilots for their private jet. They're feeding us so they could benefit regardless of how we feel about it. Also, i.e. Charlie Kirk. The things that Charlie Kirk was saying may have been in his mind believable to himself, but he wasn't feeding us his belief because he believed that it was the best thing he could do. He was doing that so he could make a profit. He was a business. His voice.
Well, how do you know? How do you know that? How do you know that?
Because he propagated it as many times as he could in networks and social sites that would pay him. He started a website.
Right, because he was trying to fund. He was trying to fund his Turning Point.
And I said for money. I said for profit.
Yeah, but the Turning
need a profit to get the message out.
But then Turning right, and so then Turning Point uses that money to get the message out. So at the bottom line of this is
it turns to a profit.
Okay,
because
you don't think that he was really motivated by spreading a message that he believed he was?
Not at all. I don't think he was.
But how do you know that? But how do you know that? How do you know that?
He was inspired by Jesus Christ.
How do you know that?
I don't think God gave him the message to portray the message he was pushing with false information.
How do you know that?
Okay, sure. If you believe that your God or your belief system will tell you to lie to people for the sake of your own gain, then maybe we're not reading the same Bible. But that's not the Bible I've read. That's not the information I've consumed from the Bible.
I don't know how many branches there. I don't know how many branches there are of Christianity, but there are thousands of branches of Christianity.
That doesn't make them right, Gary.
I'm not saying it does because they contradict each other. So the ones that contradict the others, obviously, at least one of them is not right, and maybe both of them aren't right.
And he's contradicted most people.
But how do you know he was not following what his faith told him to follow?
Oh, I'm sure if that's the message he wanted to praise, he could say it, and on the internet he would be able to get away with it, and that would be free speech. And so he could tell us that, but that's not how he moved. He moved in the light of making money and pushing an agenda.
All right. So is there something particularly evil if that in fact is the case, that he's trying to make money? I'm sure at your job, I'm sure your job, you're attempting to make money.
No, it's evil if I have to misinform you to do it. It's evil if I decide that I may know the truth, but you don't. So I'll tell you what I want you to believe.
But maybe he believed. But maybe he believed
it. Ask, Gary. I'm telling you, because you're gonna keep saying maybe, and we'll never get those answers. He's dead. Let's be real.
Right, and he's not here to. You're absolutely right. He's not here. He's not here to defend himself against your accusations.
We have eyes also. We are human also with intent in our own bodies, similar to the man that was alive, because we are all human. So me seeing him go for this thing for about 10 to 15 years I'm not new to this. I've actually known who Charlie Kirk was, and I thought he was a scary guy because he talks to the children, the underprivileged, and the people that don't get talked to. And I don't mean underprivileged by not owning or having any. I mean underprivileged by not having a voice. Underprivileged by being told to just go to school and shut up and get an education and become something. So he's speaking directly to them. I've understood and paid attention to what Charlie Kirk was doing. It's just ironic that a lot of people weren't, because they were talking to the youth, and especially he was talking to the white youth. He was speaking to young, white, impressionable men, similar to the Andrew Tates of the world. So I get what you're saying, Gary. I don't want it to sound like, oh, he's just bashing him because he's dead. No, this guy has been spewing false truths for a very long time, and he should not die this way. His kids did not deserve that. But when you speak things to people that are possibly irrational because they don't have the development yet, something has a possibility to happen to you, even if you're speaking positive people. Jesus Christ again.
So should we temper our public?
Yes. As Girl just stated, you should definitely be able to look at your voice and say, hey, maybe this is not the right angle for my safety. Maybe I do want to go home to my children. Maybe I do want to go home to my children every single night.
So
maybe this message is not the message that would allow me to do so.
Would you apply that? Would you apply that? I'm going to ask you one last question, then I'm moving on to Anson. Would you apply?
I'm sure you're going to take up all my time, but that's fine. It's your state. Go ahead.
Would you apply that standard to Martin Luther King?
I would apply that standard to anybody that's going outside speaking.
Right, I'm asking you specifically.
Excuse me. You keep interrupting me, Gary.
I'm asking you specifically. It's a yes or no question.
It's not a yes or no question because there's nuance in all of this. There's nuance in all of this.
No, Chris. Come on. Calm down, all right? I don't feel comfortable with suggesting that I know or you know or anyone knows the motive of the shooter. We don't know what was in his mind. It might come out, but we don't know his motive. And how do we know what's in the mind and the heart and the soul of another individual? Oh, he's only doing it to make money? Maybe that's true. But I'm not so sure you or I are in a position to reach that conclusion. This is not to say that I'm not as disturbed about some of the things that he espoused as you are. I am. But I'm just saying we have to be careful not to speak for other people. It's happened to me on this stage many times, and I've shut the person down for trying to speak on my behalf because I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself. People can ask me, and I'm happy to answer them, but don't speak on my behalf. If after I speak, you think I'm lying, you question my veracity, that's on you. But I try to be as forthright as possible. He's not here to defend himself against the accusation that he was just motivated by money. And I don't think it's fair to do that, even if I find some of what he espoused to be as distasteful as you do. And that's the only reason I interrupted you. And it's not a question of it being my stage. It's a question of how I want the conversations to be approached in this forum. Anson, you get the last word. Stan, you came up late. Anson, you get the last word.
The only reason I came up was to answer the question of the room directly with an emphatic yes. I do believe that social media is fanning the flames to a greater extent than I've ever seen the fans flamed in my lifetime. And Scott, when you mentioned the late 60s, I was an adult in uniform and I lived through that time. And I know exactly what you're talking about. But just imagine had the internet been up and running, how fast and farther, how much faster and farther that stuff would have spread. But I don't have any, Howard, I haven't done any deep research, so I don't have any statistics for you. But that's my observation. And the example I was going to provide was just yesterday there was a shutdown at my alma mater, the Naval Academy, because of allegations of an active shooter. And I finally found out this morning what went on, and I didn't find out from the Washington Post or online or anything. I found out by a direct quote that was forwarded to me by a classmate who happens to live in Annapolis that came from the Commandant of Midshipmen. And the thing started with a midshipman that had been discharged from the Naval Academy for some reason. I don't know what. He was outside of it, but he took his computer with him and he went back home somewhere into the Midwest. He manipulated his IP address so that it looked like the computer was broadcasting from the grounds of the Naval Academy, and he raised allegations of an active shooter, which immediately, the immediate response was to shut down the academy. And during the course of that shutdown, security guards were going through places, including Bancroft Hall, the dormitory, to find out what was going on. And the allegation broadcast by this individual was that the shooters were disguised in military uniforms. So there was a midshipman that saw somebody in uniform that he didn't know that was surreptitiously, supposedly, moving around the hallways, and he took his parade rifle and butted the guy in the head with his parade rifle, thinking he was protecting himself and his surroundings from an active shooter. And he got shot in the arm. And all that went away, and the academy's back up and running. And my point is, what laws did that son of a bitch violate? And I hope to hell that there are cops outside of his Midwestern home where he's now allegedly living with his parents, and he gets put in handcuffs, and he spends real jail time for doing that kind of crap. That's an example of how social media is fanning the flames. And the best advice that I've heard in this room in the long discussion, well, I can also say that I spent about an hour in another room with the harangues about Kirk, and it was I spoke once briefly, and that was just to say that I was disgusted with the conversation in that room, but that was after an hour of listening. Had that been a real room or a bar room, we would have had a racial fight that would have taken place. It was just absolutely disgusting. That further fans the flames. But Howard's suggestion, and I wholeheartedly endorse it, take the position, how important is it, all the crap that goes on and what we listen to and what we think, how important is it? And just don't let it upset you. Walk away from it. Don't come back for a while. Cool off and try to re-engage in a more rational way. And that's the best way I know of, is to how to handle the crap that we hear on social media.
Thank you for that, Anthony. Folks, we're here Monday through Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. New York time. So till 5 p.m. New York time on Monday for the next edition of the Critical Thinking Forum. Everybody be safe, be well, have a great weekend, and peace out.
The other question that somebody asked is, am I planning to continue the coaching after the fall? And it depends on if I feel like there's enough of a demand for it. sake of just doing it. If there's a demand for it, then we absolutely will. But if there's not a demand, no ego around pausing it or stopping it or whatever that may look like. So that's just a couple quick things about the coaching. So I'm scared to ask if there's any questions because I need to be looking at the road. Let me see. I can pull over here for just a minute. Listening to the replay from this morning. Long work day, Lauren. I understand. Hey, Michelle, blessings to you. Everybody that's speaking to me. Good to see y'all. Thank y'all for jumping in the room. Listen, let me just say this too. Let me say this really fast. I want to appreciate y'all. Because listen, y'all make sure that your boy, when I go live, y'all make sure I'm not the only one in the room. And I appreciate that. I know some people that jump on this app and they say they jump in on their rooms and nobody comes into the room. And man, I feel good because when I go live, I'm like, man, there's some wisdom walkers that's going to jump in and holler at me. Say, hey, what's up? Check in and all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, man, thank y'all. Thank y'all. Y'all make sure your boy ain't in here by himself, just looking at a blank room with nobody to talk to. So I appreciate that, man. I don't take that for granted at all. Thank y'all for that. Here trying to soak up all the wisdom. I know that's right. I'm trying to soak it up too, Chantel. I'm trying to soak it up too. Carlene. Hey, Carlene, come up on stage if you can. Come up on stage really fast if you can. I got 4 minutes. If you're able to. If you're not able to, I understand. Not able to. Okay. Understood. Carlene Carlene, were you in the spring cohort or the summer cohort? I can't remember. Spring. Okay. Yeah. So I appreciate that, Tanisha. Thank you. All right. Anybody have any questions about the coaching that starts tomorrow? Any questions? Anybody considering it, but you need a little nudge, or you got some lingering questions? And thank you to all of you that are a part of the Patreon community. I did a live this morning right after our prayer call, and that should be in the Patreon community for members. So thank y'all. Thank you. Nobody has any questions? Okay, fantastic. All right, y'all. All right, I'm gonna stay true to my word. I'm jumping off of here in 2 minutes. Everybody's good? Any questions from this morning really fast? Felt like this morning was really, really insightful. I see that, Mama Lisa. Thank you. Okay. So everybody's good. How am I? It's been a full week. Yesterday I wasn't tired, but I was sleepy. And so I got an incredible night's rest last night. My wife made sure of that. She was like, go to bed. She's like, go to bed. She came in my office last night. She's like, no, go to bed. So I went to bed at a reasonable time, and I'm excited about Sunday. I got almost everything done that I was supposed to get done this week. There's 2 things that are still left on my to-do list, but guess what? It's going to be all right, and it's going to get done next week. So that's how I am. It's college football season, so I'm even doing better. My team has a bye week this week, so we're in chill mode. But can't wait to see USF and Miami play tomorrow, and we'll go from there. And of course, we got the. I'm good. I'm good. All right, y'all. I gotta run. Thank you for asking how I'm doing too, by the way. I love y'all. I'm pulling for you, always praying for you. And I'll look forward to seeing y'all either on another pop-up or seeing y'all on Monday morning. Those of you that are a part of Crossover, I will see y'all on Sunday as we continue our series, Overcoming Overload. It's going to be good. This call is ending in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Peace, y'all.
to the other presidents, he has been one of the better ones. If not, he'll never be better than Obama.
Also,
but
you
he's
have to-
one of the best.
You have to acknowledge this is a pretty conservative country. Like it's pretty right of center, not just now, from way before. That's the only way Democrats win anything is by, I don't know if it's still working now, but claiming to be quote unquote moderate and moving to the right. Like the country is very conservative.
Hey, so I'm gonna just give the points just to wrap it all up. So for the two gentlemen, listen. When Joe Biden was in office as a senator in the '90s, there were other senators and other House of Representative members, right, who signed the bill into law, and then the president signed the law. So he's one person. Thing two, and I want you to think about this real quick. When he became the president, right, and a few of us talked about him forgiving student loans. He forgave 2 student loans in my household because he forgave mine and my wife's. So yeah, I thank him for that. But here's the thing about that: he did it using an executive order, meaning that he had to take it upon himself, figure out him and his lawyers how to make this happen, and actually did it, right? So that means there was no congressional law passed behind it. You understand what that means? That means he did that, and he did it by himself from the executive branch. So he put his foot forward without anybody else, no other parts of the government. Do you get that part? So I want you to weigh those two, right? Weigh when he was a legislator and he had to contribute to a bill along with others, and the president has to sign it, opposed to him creating an executive order to get rid of our student loans by himself as the executor. I want you to put that together, right, and figure out which one do you think, right, people will say, oh, that benefited me. Just go with that for a second.
Before we get off of it, if y'all want to blame a president for the crime bill, why do we always skip over George Herbert Walker Bush Sr., who set up a black man at that park across from the White House, literally sat on national TV with a bag of crack that he produced himself? The FBI got it somehow. There was no crack being sold across the street from the White House, but this man manifested some crack, sat on the news, and literally started the crack epidemic and all of this emphasis on crime. Literally put the battery in the black congressional Congress's back and made them, who they were tired of the crack epidemic in their communities, but literally force them to get on the roll, get on that position and make it their own and pass the crime bill, which Maxine Waters, all of them voted for. And then after the fact, they realized what had happened and that they fucked up, and they talk about it publicly. Like, this has all been hashed out. There's documentaries. We could look on YouTube and see George H.W. Bush in the Oval Office with a bag of crack that he manifested himself. I don't know